Today we're going to look at two stories that are thematically related, one from Exodus 17, the other from Exodus 18. So the first one, 17, beginning with verse 8. The Amalekites, that was a people group, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steadfast till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Second story comes in the next chapter, 18, beginning with verse 13. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you're doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give some advice, and may God be with you." So before we get into those actual stories, kind of frame it for you a little bit. I read a lot. I mean, I love to read. It's one of my favorite pastimes. I read every day. I read spiritual things, theological things, cultural things, biography, leadership. But every night, as a rule, every night I read fiction. I learned somewhere that you should read fiction before you go to sleep. It helps you sleep. So every night I read some fiction, and I read old fiction and new fiction and all kinds of stuff. But I find lately I've been gravitating more and more to the genre of fantasy fiction. Now, I see it in your eyes. You're like, well, what kind of fantasy is he reading about? Let me ease your mind. I mean, when I say fantasy, that section at the store of books that are set in sort of alternative worlds where it's kind of like ancient Earth, where there's knights and people like that, and oftentimes there's kind of mythical creatures like dragons and people with special powers, and really the line of the story, every one of them is that evil forces are arising, and that doom is on the horizon, and that some unexpected heroic character needs to arise, and it never looks possible that they could possibly save the day. But at last they do, and the world that they live in is happily ever after, right? You know what I'm talking about. Now here's the thing. Oftentimes in those stories, there's an individual that the story is focused on, a heroic person. And by the way, that's literature throughout history. I mean, go back to the ancient Greeks. That's sort of the line of great storytelling, that an unexpected hero arises. But if you think about most of the great stories, that heroic individual is also surrounded by a team of heroic individuals, and that without that supporting cast, that hero would fail. That he or she alone does not have everything needed to face the incredible evil that needs to be defeated. So just some examples for you. Think of Frodo Baggins, right? In the Fellowship of the Ring. Think of Harry Potter and his friends Ron and Hermione and Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix. See, some of you are nodding your heads for different things. Think of King Arthur and Sir Lancelot and the Knights of the Round Table. Think of Robin Hood and Little John and Maid Marian and Friar Tuck and his merry men. Think of Luke Skywalker and Yoda and Chewbacca and the Rebel Alliance. Think of Captain James T. Kirk and Scotty and Lieutenant Uhura and Bones and Mr. Spock, entire crew of the USS Enterprise. If you're into the superheroes like I am, think of the Avengers. Think of the Justice League, or some of you may remember when we were kids, Super Friends on Saturday mornings. Teams, right? Complementary powers. Everybody has a weakness. Superman has kryptonite, right? Everybody has a weakness, but when we work together, everybody has a strength that makes up for weaknesses, and there's the synergistic effect, and everybody becomes stronger. Now compare that image of a team that's empowered to do great work to what I think is very prevalent in American culture uniquely, and that's of the rugged individualist. And of course, the poster child for rugged individualism is who? John Wayne. Whether he was, in an army movie or a cowboy movie, he didn't need anybody, right? He could do it, and that's sort of an American thing that everybody should be able to stand on their own 2 feet and pull up their own bootstraps and not be dependent on others, and be strong, like on your own, right? That's a unique. That is uniquely American, that most of the world thinks in terms of family, clan, team, village, but we have that kind of in our American ethos. Well, I'm very familiar with it. John Wayne is not a relative, but John Raines is. I have a son named John Raines, but my grandfather was John Raines, who thought he was John Wayne. He wore a cowboy hat, and he had a little bit of a swagger. When he was young, he'd get in fist fights, and he worked on a bulldozer all around Central Florida many years ago, and he had a revolver on his belt, and he would shoot rattlesnakes, he said. I don't know if he ever actually did, but he said he did, shooting rattlesnakes out there in the woods. He thought he was John Wayne. And the truth is about my grandfather, he was the rugged individualist. He didn't need anybody. I don't think in his entire life he ever worked for someone or employed someone. He ran a bulldozer, he had farms, he built houses, he took care of his own cars, he rarely went to the doctor. If it needed to be done, he did it. There wasn't anything he couldn't do. Now, I say that with all due respect. There's nothing he couldn't do, but there's a lot of things he didn't do very well. There are a number of things that were pretty odd about the houses he built. I remember a number of times being on the boat out in the lake and having to paddle home because the motor he fixed broke down. He was absolutely confident that he could do anything. But sometimes Grandpa probably should have taken the boat in to get serviced, or somebody might have consulted with him. In every house he built, the electrical outlets were here on the wall, not down low. You put them down low so it's hidden behind the couch. He put it here because he didn't want to bend over. Yeah, good, yeah. And thus I have come into the world from that. There's a great Chinese proverb that says, if you want to travel fast, go alone. I mean, you can get it done. But if you want to travel far, go together. We need teams to surround us. There's a passage in Ecclesiastes, I like the Message version from chapter 4. I turned my head and saw a solitary person, completely alone, no children, no family, no friends, yet working obsessively late into the night, compulsively greedy for more and more, never bothering to ask, why am I working like a dog, never having any fun, and who cares? It's better to have a partner than to go it alone. Share the work and share the wealth. And if one falls down, the other helps. But if there's no one to help, tough. It goes on to say a cord of 3 strands, right, woven together, is not easily broken. So think about these 2 stories I just read, because I think they are really about Moses learning how to depend on a team. The first story is this. The Israelites are wandering in the wilderness. They've left Egypt where they were slaves, are heading to the promised land, and the Amalekites who live out there in the wilderness see them, and I think we're offended, what are you doing on our land? But also, they look pretty weak. I mean, these are ex-slaves. They've never fought before. They're not an army. And so they pounce on them. And so Moses calls a young man named Joshua. You're going to hear a lot about Joshua later parts of the Bible. Becomes a real leader after Moses. But he calls this young man, he says, I need you to gather up an army to fight the Amalekites. Now notice Moses doesn't fight the battle. He calls Joshua to lead it. What Moses does instead is he takes his staff and his friend Aaron and his friend Aaron's brother Aaron, his brother's assistant and they go up on a mountaintop, and Moses takes his staff. If you remember, a couple weeks ago we talked about Moses' staff. God worked a lot of pretty powerful miracles with the staff. Remember, 3 of the 10 plagues God inflicted upon Egypt through Moses' staff. When they were standing there at the bank of the Red Sea, remember Moses lifted his staff and God parted the waters, right? And they walked through on dry ground. And so Moses said, Joshua, you lead the battle. Take an army out there and you guys fight the Amalekites. I'll go up on the hill and I'll hold up God's staff. Because he knew there was power that God was going to use through the staff that would determine the outcome of the battle. Now, problem. Moses got tired. Battles go on all day long, and Moses is an older man. That's why he wasn't down on the battlefield. His arms got tired. So it says this, Exodus 18, 12 through 13, and then 15, Aaron and held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword, and Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." See what was happening is when Moses would hold the staff up, the Israelites would win. But when he would get tired and his hands would get weak, his arms would get weak, and the staff lowered and needed a break, the Amalekites started winning. They started realizing there's a pattern. If it's up, we win. If it's down, we're losing. And so along come Aaron and and they find a rock, and they put it under Moses so Moses can sit. And then they come alongside, and one holds one arm up, and one holds the other arm up. So that all day throughout the battle, the staff of Moses is raised, and the Israelite army is successful. Now, I can already hear your thoughts. You're thinking, what kind of weird magic is this? I mean, is God playing games? Like if you don't hold it high enough, I won't let you win, but no, that's not the point. They would have understood that God was responding to the elevation of God, we know you're the one who's going to win this battle, and that the power was greater as his arms were extended. It wasn't God was taking it back when he lowered it. God wasn't punishing that. The real point of the story is that Moses had to discover that he couldn't do it alone. In fact, if you think about it, in this story, Moses is the weakest member. Clearly, they won the battle because Moses' relationship with God and God working through the staff, but ultimately he was the one who had to learn he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. He needed Aaron and to help lift his hands. And by the way, not just them, there were people down there fighting the battle. Right? We know the name Joshua, but there were others down there. It took all of them to get the victory. God gave the victory, but it took a team, literally an army, to make it happen. One of my favorite authors is a French priest named Jean Vanier. Jean Vanier is famous for starting communities around the world called l'Arche, which means in French the ark, like ark, the boat, the ark, Noah's ark. And the purpose of large communities is that people who are, and I'm going to use language that isn't particularly sensitive, but people who are disabled can live side by side with people who are normally abled, you know what I mean? Like people that can't probably function on their own, who need someone to help them, and they live side by side. But what they've realized in these communities, even though you would think, well, the person who's abled is helping the person who's disabled, is that oftentimes the person who is disabled does a world of good for the person who is abled. Because sometimes there's weaknesses in the strong person, right? Sometimes we have needs that we're not always aware of until they become apparent. As you see there on the screen, Jean Vanier says, the strong need the weak as much as the weak need the strong. In this story, Moses is the weak guy. We all get weak. We all get sick. We all get tired. We all fall down. We all have shortcomings. Even Moses, with his powerful staff, couldn't win the victory by himself. Right? They needed Moses, but they also needed Joshua, Aaron, the whole army, and they mostly needed God. So there's a similar theme story in 18, and I think they're side by side because they're telling the same story. In 18, we discover that Moses' father-in-law has come to visit Moses and the Israelites. He's there to see his grandsons. He's there to see his daughter. He's there to visit with Moses. His name was Jethro. And while he's there, he observes what Moses is doing every day. And so it says, Exodus 18:13, the next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. Now think about this for a minute. You have hundreds of thousands of Israelites who until a few days ago were slaves. They didn't know how to make decisions. They didn't know how to be self-determining. They didn't know how to work through conflict because you had to do what Pharaoh told you to do. Right, that was it. But now all of a sudden they're free. Anybody remember what it was like going to college and all of a sudden mom and dad aren't making the rules anymore, right? You know, some bad choices occasionally, some things that we have to figure out. It's kind of a situation. And so where do we go for counsel? Where do we go to work out questions and disputes? Well, let's go to Moses. He seems to know God. And so what Jethro is noticing is that early in the morning, Moses leaves his tent and he takes his seat, and there's already this long line of people coming for advice, and they stand there all day and they're getting grumpy waiting in the sun, and Moses doesn't get to come in until late at night, until everybody has kind of either gotten their help and gone home, and he goes, this isn't working. You need a different way. And so it says, Exodus 18:14, what is this you are doing for the people, Jethro asks. Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening? Moses answered him, because the people come to me and seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions. Moses' father-in-law replied, and by the way, any father-in-laws in the room? Okay, this is not a time to gloat, being the father-in-law. Anybody have a father-in-law? Yeah, everybody's cringing. I'm going to see mine this afternoon. Everybody's cringing. Father-in-law advice. Okay. The father-in-law replied, what you are doing is not good. I've been told that. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Moses is just doing what he thinks needs to be done. By the way, before this whole thing of the Exodus, Moses for 40 years had been a shepherd out in the wilderness. It was just him taking care of sheep. They were all dependent upon him as the shepherd. And so this is just natural behavior. He's used to being depended upon. He's used to working alone. And so everybody has a need. They come to him. He just does it. He hasn't even thought about another option, but it's not working. So here's father-in-law's advice. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions. Show them the way they're to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, and have them bring every difficult case to you. If you do this, God so commands, you'll be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Who's it for? Jethro's advice. Is it for Moses? Or is it for the people? It's for both. He's like, this isn't working for anybody. You're wearing yourself out and you never could help everybody. And you're wearing the people out. They need help and you can't give them the help they need. This isn't working. You need a team. You need to find capable, God-fearing, godly, talented leaders to help you do the work that needs to be done, right? Same as the story before. Moses couldn't win the battle, just he and his staff. He needed Joshua, an army, Aaron, Now again, you need to appoint leaders to help share in the work. Now, notice this. Did he say anything about, look, why are you working so hard? You need to get people to do the work for you. If you can appoint some elders, then you could retire early. Moses. Did he say that? Like, you need to get some people in place so you can go into work a little later, take longer lunches, get a little more golf in. You say that? No. In fact, there's no indication in this story that Moses is going to work any less. He's going to focus on the things that only he can do. You alone have knowledge of God, Moses. You need to instruct the people. You need to take the hardest cases. Let other people deal with these. When there's a dispute that they can't handle, let them bring it to you. Moses isn't going to work any less. He's going to focus on what only he can do and allow what others can do so they can be part of what God is doing. Lisa Turkhurst wrote a book called The Best Yes. She said, do what you need to do to protect and strengthen the fabric of your relationships because we need each other. It's okay to get help. So throughout this series, we've been talking about how God moves, and sometimes God moves through a person, but really what we'll talk about today is how God moves through people, groups of people, that it takes all of us to be the kingdom of God and to do all God intends. It's what Pastor Wayne Cordero calls the divine responsibility of every single one of us. It's a core biblical teaching that every one of us is called, every one of us is gifted, every one of us have a role to play in the church. Some of us do it full time, some of us are paid to do it, some of us are ordained, some of us aren't ordained, some of us do it as volunteers, some of us do it a lot of the time, some of us do a little time, but it takes all of us. Here's the core teaching, 1 Corinthians 12. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is part of it. And God has placed in the church, first of all, apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing and of helping, of guidance, and different kinds of tongues. And that's the image he wants us to have, that all of us together, every single one of us together are like a human body. And just like the human body has lots of different functions, a hand does something different than a foot does, and a knee does something different than an armpit does, and on, we need all of it. They all work complementary. They all have a different purpose. And without any one of them working, the body is less. In fact, let's go back to my language, disabled. I mean, we learn to function sometimes when some part of the body isn't working properly. We get by, but it takes an adjustment. The body properly is meant that every part, all of us, are doing the thing, the gift, the ability that God has given us to do. It takes all of us. Oscar Romero says, we cannot do everything, and there's a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it's a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter in and do the rest. It takes all of us. Not one of us can do everything. It takes all of us. I was thinking about this sermon yesterday. I was at a hospital visiting a member of the church, and it just occurred to me, thinking about this message, how many people it takes to care for a patient. There's the nurses standing right outside her room, but there was the doctors who did the operation the day before, and there was the anesthesiologist who helped her sleep through that. There was the x-ray people and the EKG people, and there's the dietitian who comes by and says, what would you like to eat, and what should you eat? And there's the people who cook the food and bring that, and there's the people who bring the food, and there's people that keep the hospital clean, and there's the people who administrate the hospital, and there's a security guard making sure nobody inappropriate gets in the hospital. It takes everybody, right, to care for a single patient to make them well. It takes a team. Think about Sunday mornings. A lot of attention often goes to, the folks who help lead the service or preach, or the musicians that are up front. How often do we forget the guys sitting in the back of the room? Wave to them, will you? And by the way, the guy in the middle is Andrew. Today's his last day with us. Would you join me in thanking Andrew for his service to us? And by the way, when we're in here doing this, we also have a part-time, off-duty security police officer on campus. We also have a custodian on campus. We also have folks that make coffee and serve it out there. We have folks that now work in the Welcome Center. We had our ushers earlier in the service come and collect your offering. Tomorrow there'll be people who come in and count the offering. Last week we had folks that put together the bulletin and all the announcements. Ben did the videos on the screen. Angie types up the bulletin. We work on it together as a staff. Volunteers come in and fold it and stuff it on Fridays. It takes an army. We have nursery workers working with babies. We have Lisa and volunteers working with children. We have Chris working upstairs with the youth, except he's on a mission trip right now. It takes an army, right? just to make one service happen on Sunday morning. It takes a lot of people with talents and abilities. So I just want to wrap up by saying, I want to say three things. I'll say them fairly quickly. The first is this. As the pastor, I know I get a lot of upfront time. Like I know you hear from me a lot. But I just want you to hear this from me. One of the things that's hardest for me about being a pastor is the daily awareness that I've disappointed someone. Every day I know that I've let somebody in the congregation down. I promise you it's not intentional. I promise you. Sometimes it's because I didn't know. Sometimes it's because I can't be two places at the same time. And sometimes it's because I'm human and I make mistakes. And so I want to say I'm sorry. If I have let you down in any way ever, I want you to hear I'm sorry. I don't ever desire to as your pastor, let you down. Somebody came up to me after the first service, after I said it, said, "You've never let me down." I said, "Just give me some time." Because I know I will. And so I want you to hear that. And just, I guess I would ask for a little grace and mercy in that too. And then second, I want to say how grateful I am on your behalf that we have so many great pastors and staff that work for our church that make so much happen so that this can be such a great church. But beyond that, we would never function if it weren't for the leaders in our church who lead communities, who lead ministries, who lead small groups, the many who contribute their time and energy and their talents. So I want to say thank you. If you fit in any of those categories, thank you. This church would not be what it is without you. And then finally this. If you're saying, well, I'm not one of those, I don't do anything, you can. You could, right? Just think about this service so far. We've talked about needing mentors. We've talked about needing small group hosts, right? Every Sunday, there's something in the bulletin saying, here's a way you could be involved. And it's not just because we need you, we do. It's an invitation, friends. God is at work in this world. The kingdom of heaven is advancing on the earth, and the gates of hell will not stand against it. Don't you want to be part of that? God wants you to be part of it. He's given you a gift, an ability, a talent to be part of it. I invite you to be part of it.